Today's guest on A Life and a Living is Don Khouri. Now, Don has had a very successful long career in the corporate world with Fidelity, leading software teams globally, managing big projects on a global basis, which is a challenge all unto itself. And he references that. But since he left Fidelity, he decided to focus in his time on making the rest of us as effective and as efficient as possible. He is publishing a book, When to Say Yes, which is a great read. I highly recommend it. But I interviewed Don primarily about the book and talking about what are the 5 steps to really get control of your life, get control of the work that you're doing. We also talk about emails, how to effectively do that, and also how to take control of the dreaded disease of back-to-back Zoom meetings, WebEx meetings, FaceTime meetings, team meetings, whatever they're called, whatever the tool is that you're using. So great interview. Love the content. Very practical tips. He said he does come from that corporate background, so he understands the world of the corporate and the business environment. So what he's talking about here comes from real experience. So sit back and enjoy. Very entertaining, Don Khouri. Don, thank you so much indeed for joining us here today on A Life and a Living. It's great to have you all the way from Boston with us.
Pleasure to be here, John. Excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. It's a topic that's very close to my heart. But just to give a bit of context to it, you worked for a number of years with Fidelity, and where you led a lot of the software teams. So maybe just give a little bit of background there. And then what caused you to take this kind of sharp turn right into a very different career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, I worked for Fidelity for 21 years, leading global software development teams from Boston to Bangalore and Paris to Dallas. And my job as a leader was to get them to work together across time zones, across cultures, across continents, and deliver software on time, on budget. Easy, right?
Oh, simple. Yeah. What else did you got to do? That was the easy part of the job.
So, and I love doing that. We created systems for end users like trading systems, and I also managed many of the middleware systems and market data systems, which was really fun because it took all of the data from all the stock exchanges, normalized them, processed them, and then distributed them throughout Fidelity. And it was part of our job to maintain increasing capacities of, we're talking 100,000 messages per second. And that's, 10, 12 years ago. So really interesting stuff. But why did I transition is another good question. And in the early 2000s, Bob Reynolds, who was at the time the vice chairman of Fidelity, he's now chairman at Putnam Investments in Boston. And he was speaking to a group of senior leaders, and he said, I see it as a failure of our company when we have to hire leaders from outside. So that's a pretty clear message to all of us in the room. It's your job to develop the next generation of leaders. So I took that pretty seriously. It's vice chairman's asking. I'm going to learn as much as I can about developing leaders and effective communication and building high-performing teams. And the more I did that type of work, I enjoyed that as much as I did the software development. So in 2008, I left to pursue a full-time career in developing leaders, and with a particular bent on personal productivity, which I've just always been passionate about.
All right. Okay. So interesting. So, and you've got your book coming out. When is the actual launch date and the name so people have it?
Yes, it's September 14th, 2021. Very soon. And the name of the book is When to Say Yes, the 5 Steps to Protect Your Time. So if anyone wants to learn more about it, just go to whentosayyes.com, whentosayyes.com, and you can pre-order or get on our email list.
But I find it interesting because, I mean, it's a great title, and the book is a really good book because you sent me on an advanced copy of it. And, one of the things that struck me, and reflecting, because my own background's in corporate and I work with a lot of large corporates, and you know this, is that, we all know the mantra of saying no. And we all quote, and I still quote it myself, the Steve Jobs as a focus is about saying no. So
Mhm,
to a large extent, we know the importance of it. And in your own words, we also know how to say it, but we
mhm,
don't know when to say it.
mhm.
Can you elaborate on that? Because that's for executives in large corporates, they're under huge pressure. There's wall-to-wall meetings. There's all sorts of stuff, priorities being piled on priorities and all of this. When do they say no?
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting question because here's what I learned. I interviewed C-level executives all around the country and asked them a series of questions, mostly around how do you evaluate requests for your time?
Mhm.
Because hey, why do we need another productivity book? There's great productivity books. I stand on the shoulders of great productivity authors, and they teach us how to manage what's already on our list. And where I saw the gap is how do we decide what gets on our list? And that's where the when question comes in. Because here's the other thing I learned in interviewing C-level executives is we don't like to say no.
Mhm.
We don't like to say no. It's hard to say no. People would rather just figure it out, or they feel that saying no puts people on the defensive. So if we can just flip that on its head and know when to say yes, then by default, we know when to say no. So that's where the 5 steps to protect your time come in. It's a 5-step process with 5 questions to really get crystal clear. Does this belong on my plate or not?
Yeah. So when you're working in a large organization, you're kind of part of that ecosystem.
Yeah.
And from an individual perspective, I mean, you run your own business, I run my own business. I can decide to say yes to something or say no to something. Not saying I always do it, but I can. I have the capacity to do it. But if I'm working in the ecosystem of a large organization, it can be more challenging to say no.
Hmm.
And it can be difficult to say no. And what I find very often is that, you know, more and more priorities get layered one on top of the other, but nothing gets taken away. So how does
Hmm.
the executive manage that? Because there's a capacity. I mean, it was a factory. We know that a factory can produce X number of widgets per week. It's not going
Hmm.
to do, two X, with the
Hmm.
same capacity. But we think that people can do that.
Yeah. So I'll answer that in 2 ways. First of all, the question is, how do you say no in an ecosystem that is expecting you to say yes?
Mm,
Right. That's your question. So first of all, one of the questions I ask these people is there ever a time when you feel like you can't say no? And there's a specific set of situations that go on where they can't say no. And since we both worked in financial services, and many of the people that I spoke with also come from financial services, there's an audit and regulatory request that really must be met to stay compliant. So that's one set of areas that where you can't say no. The other is, and again, background in technology and software development and supporting systems is an outage that affects customers, a production
yeah.
outage or something. That's usually going to get prioritized to the top.
Mm,
So that's one answer to your question. The other answer to your question is, I'll tell you this: the most effective leaders that worked for me in my corporate career were the ones that responded to my requests with something like, Don, we're happy to do that for you. And could you let me know where that fits in the priority list? And
yeah.
then together, we would look at their priority list and would say, all right, you know what? This really does need to go to the top. Let's move everything else down. And maybe we need to renegotiate commitments. Or after a review, we would say, you know what? Stick with what you're doing. Those are the top priorities. This one can wait.
Mm,
But when you don't have that effective list to match up against, that's when everything gets
yeah.
piled on.
I always tell the story that years ago I had a boss, and he would come into my office and he would say, "I have a great idea," right? But the great idea would always meant that I was going to do the work, right? So he'd walk out of my office thrilled that he'd shared this wonderful piece of, of great creativity and innovation and all that sort of stuff. But I was doing the work, and I kind of realized that's not a very good system. So I began to adopt something like what you were saying and saying, okay, well, here are the 5 things we agreed I am going to work on. Which one do you want me to drop?
Exactly. And
Then
I was probably that same type of leader, by the way, creating those ideas and throwing way too much work on people. And they figured it out too. Okay, this is how we manage up. This is how we manage our
absolutely.
priorities.
But coming back to your book, When to Say Yes, is, it's all about saving and protecting your time. Is it a process, or is it a mindset, or is it both?
It's both, actually, because I went into this research asking myself, what is the mindset of the most productive people? What is their mindset? So what are you thinking about when you get a request for your time? That's a type of question. And as a result of that mindset, the 5 steps came out of that. But I think if listeners can take one thing away, that awareness of your mindset when you're evaluating requests for your time, that in itself, I think, can be a game changer without even knowing the details. Because if you think about that mindset, then you're going to be more conscious, as opposed to what I think a lot of people do today is they just default into yes.
Okay.
And there's a chapter in the book where I just talk about email requests for your time. So think about that. I don't know where your listeners are. I think the average I've heard is 120 emails per day. I get about 200 per day. And each one of those is a request for your time.
Yeah.
And how do you process that and evaluate that?
I want to come back to email because it's an important point. But you mentioned a couple of times the 5 steps, right?
Yes.
Would you maybe walk through those 5 steps so people can actually hear them and understand them?
Yeah, sure. So step number 1 is, does it align with your roadmap? So again, back to these most productive people, they have a roadmap of their life and their work. And it ranged in length, but I suggest in the book, take 3 years and look at the next 3 years of your life and map it out. Just like you were to map out a trip from New York to Los Angeles. You'd know where you're going to stop, where you're going to spend more time, where you're just going to drive through. You're going to have some mission of the drive. Do you want to enjoy it, or do you just want to get to the destination? So all of that, and more detail on your roadmap in year number 1. So by months and quarters, what you want to accomplish. And there's a new goal setting process also I introduce in there to get really clear about each item on your roadmap.
Right.
So that's number 1. If it doesn't align with your roadmap, then it's still possible to say yes, but I think more unlikely that you're going to say yes. Step number 2 is consider who is asking. So this was interesting because I think we do it subconsciously. And even the leaders that I spoke to, most of them were doing it at some subconscious level, but they'll give more weight to certain people's requests than others. Sometimes, and it was different for everyone. Sometimes it was their boss. Sometimes
was that based on hierarchy or?
Not always, not always. So even some senior C-level executives put their clients above their boss.
Right, okay. Yeah.
But a lot of cases it was their boss or their spouse. If there was a family situation, that would oftentimes bubble to the top. So what I encourage people to do is be really conscious of that, what I call relationship hierarchy. So that's step 2. Step 3 is consider the quality of the request. So can I share actually a quick story?
Please do, yeah.
So this is from President Truman. And he calls his cabinet together one Monday morning. And he asked them to create a report for them. And they said, yeah, sure, happy to do that, Mr. President. Give us a couple of days. We'll bring it back to you. So they work on it all week. They bring the report back Friday afternoon, put it on his desk, and he takes it with him for the weekend. And he comes back Monday morning and he says, is this absolutely the best you can do? That's my best Harry Truman impersonation, by the way.
As far as I'm concerned, it's really good.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So they said, I think we could beef up the introduction and the conclusion, make it more compelling, give us a couple more days, we'll come back. So they work on it all week. They come back Friday afternoon, plop it on his desk. He takes it with him for the weekend and comes back the next Monday. And again, he asks, is this absolutely the best you can do? And I said, well, I think we could maybe have some more graphs to make this more visual, support the data a little bit more, get our constituents involved, give us a couple of days. So they work on it all week. They cover all their bases. They bring it back Friday afternoon. And this time they're proactive. They said, Mr. President, we've covered all our bases. This is the best report. We've talked to everyone. We've gone through every last detail. This is absolutely the best report we can give you. And he said, great. Now I'll read it. So see, the most productive people expect requests for their time to be fully thought through and crystal clear. Otherwise, they'll reject it. Right. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we accepting lackluster requests for our time? So that's number 3. Number 4 is priority. So what I encourage is prioritize and reprioritize. Now I'm going to guess, John, that your listeners have a pretty full plate already. Is that a fair request?
That would be very fair.
Okay, cool. So if a new request comes in, we really have to, as the leaders that work for me in my corporate example, we really have to have a clear list and make a decision about what may need to be reprioritized. And that's what really the most effective and most productive leaders do is they know how to reprioritize effectively when those requests come in. And it's not always reprioritize. Of course, a lot of times it's, this doesn't fit right now. There are some productivity experts that minimize the importance of priority, and I'm bringing it back to the forefront because I think it really all drives from that. We need to be clear about it. Your priority needs to drive your energy level and your location and your time. And I talk about how to really use your time in that section of the book as well. So that's a good segue to step number 5, which is master delegation. So the most productive people, they looked at delegation from 2 perspectives. The first one's obvious: get it off my plate so I can do a more appropriate type of work. And the second one was more interesting, which is they immediately think about a development opportunity for someone else. So how can they develop someone on their team at the same time as delegating? Because that's good for someone, and people that have a leader that develops them, they want to work for that person, but also it increases capacity because now they can do more next time around. So that was very conscious with the most productive people. So we really got to master delegation as well.
Okay, so they're the 5. Can I touch on something there in regard to meetings? I know you talk about meetings, and there are kind of 2 questions in here. One is, how can we make meetings more productive? Number 1. And secondly, how do you manage this kind of culture of, kind of back-to-back Zoom, WebExes, Teams, whatever it might be, that people are just spending their entire lives, in front of a screen in the current world that we're living in? How do you stop that cycle? And how do you make the meetings then that you have more productive?
Yeah. Well, that's a whole podcast in itself, I think, but I'll give you some top of mind items. First of all, embrace time blocking. So if people don't know what time blocking is, it's blocking time on your calendar for yourself and your goals only, or the specific goal that you want to work on. And that time shows up and you've got a block for you and you honor that time. It's actually the only way I was able to write the book. I have a time block on my calendar every single day to write. And that momentum actually is what creates great creative work as well. Because if you work on it once a week and put it aside, or once a month and put it aside, you're losing that momentum. So if you
Yeah.
really want to make progress on your goals, time block, and the most important ones, time block daily, and then really honor it. Because I think there are people out there that use time blocking and not necessarily honor the time. They may get
Yeah.
pulled into other things or reprioritize.
Interesting you should say that about an author, because there's a friend of mine who's a successful author, and he time blocks every day. I think it's from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. every day to write. And and his rationale was exactly what you were saying, but also he said, people think that I write when I'm kind of get inspiration, but he said, if I waited like at inspiration, I'd never sit down to write. And he said it is the discipline of actually doing it every single day. And some days are much more productive than other days in terms of how many pages I write, but it's the discipline of being there every day.
Yeah, what I've learned is that like inspiration that we see in the movies where people just write and the papers are flying off the typewriter. They still use typewriters in
Yeah,
movies
they
for
do.
some reason. And it's really a fallacy
It
because
is,
the
yeah.
inspiration comes from that daily. There's a great book actually by Seth Godin, his latest book, which is called Practice. And it's all about that creative process of whatever creative work you're doing
Yeah.
and how to deliver it. So, and he breaks it. It's a great book because he breaks it down into, I think there are 230 chapters in the book. So very small
Right. Yeah.
chunks.
I love his stuff. I
Yeah.
think he's great stuff.
Agreed.
So just touch on making meetings effective. Just your high level stuff on that.
So I would first ask yourself, let's look at it from both perspectives. You're getting a request to attend a meeting, and you're running a meeting. So if you're getting a request to attend a meeting, I would first ask, are you really necessary to be there? Um, and are all the other appropriate people and decision makers in the meeting at the right time as well? So, because if not, then maybe it needs to be rescheduled, or maybe you can send someone. Maybe it's another opportunity to delegate, or maybe you don't really need to attend at all. I would look for a couple factors when scheduling a meeting. If you're running a meeting, first of all, always publish the outcome of the meeting with an agenda ahead of time. So if people walk into a meeting knowing the outcome, we're much more likely to have a productive meeting. So we are going to decide on XYZ, or we are going to, even if it's a status meeting, we're going to provide a status on XYZ, or we're going to identify the most important risks in this project so that we can address the risks and minimize the risks. Step two is, as I said in the response portion, is make sure you're including all the right people and the right people are in the room. Third is make sure there's a clear time for each item on the agenda. So I love to facilitate high level strategic type meetings. And there's an art to letting the group address a topic that may be going deeper or longer than necessary versus staying on a strict agenda. And what I do is I just engage the group in that. So let's ask ourselves a process question here. We're longer on this item. Is this important enough that we want to resolve it now and defer some of the other items? Or do we need to table this so we can get the other items on the agenda? And if you can have a 30-second process discussion about that, it's going to make meetings more effective. The other thing that happens is, and it's kind of funny, is lots of discussion and lots of action, and people leave the room without 100% clarity on the actions. So you want to have really more productive meetings. Make sure there's someone capturing the actions, replaying them, and then communicating them at the end.
And then checking if they get done at the next one when you come together.
Right. Accountability. That's another podcast.
Accountability. Absolutely. That is another podcast. Can I come back to something that you mentioned and you talk about it, you write about it in the book? And this is, about emails. Emails, great tool, but can be a huge time stealer if you allow it. And you say in the book, don't check it, process it. Can you maybe just elaborate on that?
So here's what we get when we check email. It feeds the dopamine in our system, right? It's the same thing that we get from any type of excitement, food and drugs, even that you get that dopamine hit. So when we have our email open all day and we see a bold message come in, then it feeds our dopamine. It's addicting and we want more. So we check, and we check it on our phones, and we check it on the computer. And what happens when we're really checking email? The word itself means to look at something, but not necessarily take action. So you look at it, you read it, okay, I'll deal with that later. Look at it, read it, that's too complex, I'm going to deal with that later. And you end up with 5,432 emails in your inbox. I think the record I ran across was someone just over 100,000 emails in your inbox, which, for some people, they say, okay, that's the way I store them and manage them. For me, it's clutter.
Oh yeah.
So there was another part of your question. Remind me.
No, it was just about, no, don't just watch them, don't process them.
Yeah, process. So if we have a mindset, again, it's a mindset shift of not checking email, but actually I'm going to sit down and process my email and make a decision about each one of these little requests for my time, then you're going to keep up with it. If you can do that. So again, I get about 200 a day, and I process email 3 times, once in the morning. So I'm clean right now. No messages in my inbox when we started this. And I'll check it again midday, 12 or 1. And then towards the end of the day, 5 or 6. And that's how you stay current. And here's the other thing that happens when we check is we're multitasking. And we can get into a whole topic about multitasking too, but we're focused on one thing, we're focused on our goal, or focused on our meeting. And the research is pretty clear. We can't multitask. So as soon as you go over to that email, you're no longer paying attention to your goal or your meeting or the other conversation. Imagine if I pulled up my phone here and, started looking at what do I need to respond to? If it's urgent, people will find you in other ways.
But there's a huge amount of research, as you say, in terms of time lost from switching because you're not actually multitasking, you're switching from one thing to another.
Exactly.
And there's a huge amount of time being lost. In your opinion, from all of the work that you have done, and you've done a lot of research, you've written books, you've kind of spoken to people, you've consulted with people, what do you believe is the number one tool of the most productive leaders?
Yeah, it's surprising that actually what it is, and it's so obvious, because people are going to expect me to say, oh, is it the Microsoft to-do list, or is it Google Tasks, or is it Trello or Evernote or some tool like that? It's actually so simple and obvious that we don't think about it, which is our calendar. And because we trust our calendar more than anything else that we do, which is why I'm a big proponent of that time blocking. If we can get our goals on our calendar and scheduled out, in fact, don't leave any time, don't leave any openings on your calendar for other people to grab for their projects, because then it's their goals you're working on. Now, that may support your goals ultimately, and you have to make that decision. But I advocate schedule as much of your day as possible with meetings and collaboration and serving others and working on your goals as well. So
you said something that I was trying to actually get under, and I didn't quite get under it. But I saw a quote from you, is that you should eliminate your free time. Is that what you mean by the time blocking?
It is, because I love to say it that way because it's a little controversial. Like, what do you mean? I'm not going to give up my free week. You want me to be productive all the time? And actually, I talk about, even when you think you're not productive, you're likely productive. If watching Netflix in the evening with your family is building relationships and spending time and fostering, then that's productive time. So what I mean by free time is, don't leave it up to chance. Really be more conscious about, yes, I want family time. In fact, block that stuff first. Block your most important stuff for when you look at your, I'm scheduling out in 2022 right now, looking at vacation times in 2022 and family time in 2022, because I want to block around that. And then the big business items and the big customer items are probably the next big block, fill in that. And even weekends, think about if you can be more conscious about how you're going to use your time on weekends, then you can be more productive. And again, productive in my mind is family time, leisure time.
Yeah, sure.
That's productive time.
Okay.
I actually have this, my wife likes to be sometimes more spontaneous on weekends. And so we have this little joke, I'm fine being spontaneous as long as we plan to be spontaneous.
Yeah, but I'm spontaneous between 6 and 7 in the evening. Yeah,
right.
Because I've scheduled to be spontaneous at that time. Don, this is great stuff. We could go on, and we definitely will come back and do another session. But before I ask you to kind of say where people can get in touch with you and buy your book, question I ask everybody is a book other than their own that's had an impact upon them. What's the book and what's the impact?
Can I share two?
You can.
So the book that actually got me on this journey of personal productivity and learning more about it is called Getting Things Done by David Allen. And yes.
Big fan.
I actually attended a workshop with David in 1990, 11 years before he wrote Getting Things Done. And he just really inspired me to learn as much as I could about performance and high producing. And, I came back after a 2-day seminar on a Friday afternoon. I was so excited about putting all of this to work that it really allowed me to, and enabled me, I would say, to grow in my career and have a successful career, because it showed me how to focus on the important things. The other book that really inspired this book is by Dan Pink, called When, W-H-E-N, When. And in his book, he envisions and forecasts that there's going to be a series of when-to books, just like there are how-to books. So, and he talks about the best time to do all different things in your life, and what's the best time in your life to do it, what's the best time of day to do it. And so it's a great book, and that's what got me to think about we really need a process and a timing of when to say yes.
Yeah, well, I've read, and I would be a big fan of Getting Things Done and David Allen stuff. I love his material. I love his approach. Dan Pink, I'm a great fan of his. I haven't read that book, so that's one to add to the list. So thank you for that. The other question is daily rituals. If you have them, what are they, and what do they do for your day?
Well, this is another thing. The research is clear on morning rituals and that driving productivity, and in particular meditation. I know you just had a whole podcast recently on mindfulness.
Yeah. And
so I leave time in the morning. First drink water, because it cleans out your system. So 1 or 2 glasses of water first thing in the morning. Most mornings have some sort of exercise routine. Sometimes it's a walk, sometimes it's on the rower, sometimes it's a workout with a trainer. For me, very short time of meditation or mindfulness, usually 5 to 7 minutes. Not a long time. And then I'll transition into asking myself some really positive questions, like, how can I make this a great day? What am I grateful for? Who loves me? Who do I love? Because when you get yourself in that kind of gratitude mindset, then the rest of the stuff seems easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I'm a big fan of daily rituals and exactly what you're talking about there. Don, this has been fantastic. Where can people get in touch with you, and where can they also get the book, When to Say Yes?
Yeah, so to get the book, go to whentosayyes.com and click on the pre-order link. Excuse me, if the pre-order link's not there, get on the email list and you'll hear about it soon enough. And there's a way to contact me right on that website as well. So contact me there, and I'm happy to respond. I promise I'll respond to your email.
You're very good. Don, thank you so much for being a guest today. It's been fantastic. Great tips. Love the conversation. Love the content. Good luck with the book. Having read it, I can tell you it will be a big success for you. I've no doubt about that. But thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you, John. Love your energy. I love your questions. This has been a blast.
Thank you.